Ladies and gentlemen, you are here for Benchmark Your Digital Enterprise workshop, and this workshop is focused on the industry preparedness on the digital enterprise. We'll talk about its challenges, we'll talk about some of the things about industry practices, who's doing what, and how prepared are we for the digital enterprise. We've been talking about IoT since morning and since yesterday, and we heard the speakers this morning, keynote speakers about the IoT. Most of you know industrial Internet of Things is an emerging topic of technical, social, and economic significance. Customer products, durable goods, cars, trucks, industrial and utility components, sensors, other everyday objects are being combined with Internet connectivity and powerful data analytics capabilities. That's a promise. That's a promise to transform the way we live, we work, we play. There are some analyst projections that IoT and economy and IoT will have about 100 billion devices connected, and the impact on the economy is close to $11 trillion. So we all are here to learn more about it. Just before we get started, by the show of hands, would you please, tell me who is from the process industry here? Process industry. Process manufacturing. Industrial products. Medical devices. Okay, good. So mostly that's what I thought. Mostly this is a process industry seminar. And ladies and gentlemen, my name is P.K. Tikku. I am your host for this workshop today. And I have actually myself been in the midst of the technology since the very early on in my career. I've been working for Rockwell Automation about 23 years, and automation has been my past, and before I joined L&T many years ago. So this workshop, as I said, will be focused on IoT, its impact, challenges, preparedness of the industry to its adoption. We are not only talking about the technology here, connected components. One logistical question, one logistical thing that I want to mention is that you will see these remotes on your table. This is a very interactive and collaborative session. We would need your participation to answer the surveys. We'll be conducting the surveys on the fly, and you will see the results yourself, how you voted. There will be multiple choice sort of options for you. A, B, C, D, and E, or sometimes F. Please select one of these options when we have the surveys going on. It will take about a second to reflect the results, but we will have the results displayed on the board. And we will then talk to our distinguished guests and the panelists, which I'm going to introduce in a second, about the responses that we're getting. Okay, so let's move on to the slide number 2. This seminar, this workshop is being actually organized and sponsored by L&T Technology Services. L&T Technology Services is a global technology company, technology services company, a pure-play engineering company which helps drive innovation, business growth in almost all the industry verticals. And L&T Technology does have an industrial automation and established practice. We do industrial automation services. We have automation labs. We do DCS systems, DCS control systems. And as you can see, we are we have about 217 global clients. We have 43 top R&D spenders, 176 patents. We're growing year over year at about 7.6% on an annual growth rate, and employ currently about 10,000 people. Now this is a good segue to introduce my panelists here. And my panelists today are Dr. Satyam Priyadarshy. Dr. Satyam is a pioneer in the field of data science and emerging technologies. He is the first chief data scientist of the oil and gas industry. Last year, Smart Industries named him as one of the key innovators on the leading edge of digital transformation. Dr. Satyam is a globally recognized leader with breadth of scientific knowledge, in-depth technology experience, and extensive business acumen. Dr. Satyam has various leadership positions in AOL, Network Solutions, Exim Corporation, before he joined Halliburton. Dr. Satyam has also co-founded a few startups in Silicon Valley and currently is on the advisory board of some of those startups. Next to Dr. Satyam, my second distinguished guest and a panelist is Mr. Ralph Rio. Most of you know him. And he's the vice president of ARC Advisory Group. His focus is on the assets, lifecycle management, enterprise asset management, field services management, global services providers. And Ralph brings in about 40 years of experience in the industry and in-depth knowledge of asset performance management, digitization, IoT, and Ralph has also worked with General Electric, Emerson Electric, Digital Equipment, Motorola, and Texas Instruments before he joined ARC. Our third panelist and distinguished guest today is Mr. Amit Chadha. Mr. Amit Chadha is a whole-time director of L&T Technology Services. He's a whole-time director of the board of L&T Technology Services and is part of the management team providing business leadership, market direction, strategic vision to the company. Amit is responsible for helping global R&D customers and Fortune 500 companies leverage the company's digital engineering offerings to their strategic differentiation and product development. Prior to joining L&T, Amit headed North America's manufacturing sector for Mahendra Satyam and also was responsible for creating and building an energy utilities business unit globally for Satyam. So welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. So we're going to talk about, as I said, it's going to be a very interactive session. We will start with our first question for the group. The first, so we're talking about what is your organization's level of adoption of digital smart technologies in the manufacturing process? This is a question that you, for your experience and what your organization, where it is today, and please take the minute and respond with your remotes. So we will see the results changing as you respond. We'll give it about a second to reflect the results. Appreciate everybody's participation on this. All right, it's very dynamic. It's very dynamic. It's going up and down. Very good. That means people are actually, hey, look, I mean, this is technology, right? Connected components we're talking about. We're not only talking about it, we're using it, which is very good. All right, POCs and pilot stage, we're about 40%. That's what I thought. Discussion strategy stage, about 30%. Implemented results, 13%, not bad. I wouldn't have thought about that. But seeing impact of ROI, about 17%. So by far the most of the, the audience here is at the POC stage and pilot stage here. And this is, that gives me an, good segue to a good first question. We'll put our first question to Ralph. Since you are in the ARC advisory group, digital transformations, as you can see the results, are playing a major role, obviously, and redefining the business processes. In your, according to you, Ralph, what are the top 3 industry verticals? Those are adapting the digital transformation today.
Okay, yeah. By far, the dominant industry, or the leading industry, is equipment manufacturers. And they are driven by revenue enhancement, where they're selling aftermarket services, their installed base, monitoring the health of equipment, and when things are not going so well, predictive maintenance, they send an alert to either the asset owner, or they send an alert to their dealer and go out and make the repair. So this has 2 effects. One is around increased revenue, and the other one is higher customer satisfaction, because they don't have unplanned failures. People are happier with the equipment to get repeat orders. So there's, for the equipment manufacturers, clear revenue enhancement is the business benefit for that. But beyond equipment manufacturers, basically any asset-intensive industry is doing a similar thing, monitoring assets and the health. We see it in particular, for example, in oil and gas, in the extraction process. If the equipment that is extracting oil out of the ground goes down, unplanned downtime, that has particularly in today's economy, a very direct impact on revenue for that particular operating unit. There's less oil coming out of the ground, the less revenue impacts revenue. So we see high adoption in those asset-intensive industries where unplanned downtime of critical equipment impacts revenue is another common implementation. And the third one that is off the charts for a lot of people is passenger trains. So when there's unplanned downtime for a passenger train, that not only impacts the ability to meet the schedule for that particular passenger train, but it also affects every passenger train behind them in the schedule and has pretty dramatic effects on the service level agreements that the passenger train operator may have. And it turns out the most common failure mode is the doors don't close. People are not likely to go on a train if the doors are open, and they don't like the train moving when the doors are open. So it's all those examples are around condition monitoring, predictive maintenance, and preventing the dreaded, ugly, horrible, unplanned downtime. And I just brought up a few examples that
Sure.
have come across our desk often, but this has gotten to the point where it's really much more pervasive than those industries. It's very common for the predictive maintenance.
Thank you, Rolf. You mentioned equipment manufacturers, asset monitorings, and passenger trains. I think you're absolutely right. There are passenger trains. I've seen a lot of transformation happening. Amit, would you like to comment on this as well? What do you think about the top three industry segments those are implementing digitization?
So I would actually agree with Ralph on the industry segments. I'll just add a couple of more industry segments that we have. Add a couple of industry segments. One in particular is consumer goods. So we do see consumer goods coming along through the doors. And second is not just rail, but the rest of transportation as well. Those two additional sectors. And Ralph already talked about asset condition monitoring, preventive maintenance. I'll add two more processes that we are seeing where people are excited about trying to use digitization. One is plant visualization. So when you're about to set up a plant, you actually go through design clashes, you go through all of visualizing the entire supply chain, the entire manufacturing process, and with HoloLens and other new technology coming up in augmented reality, it's all becoming real time for people rather than build it up and then find out that there were problems. So that is one. The second one is all about safety. And this is to do with operator safety. This is to do with plant safety. And there is a significant amount of POCs, if I may, that people are talking about and working on around safety. Finally, if you look at, so not just the US, because the US is a highly litigated society, but if you look at third world countries like, you look at China, you look at India, you look at parts of Europe as well, the litigation amount is going up, so people are becoming a lot more careful around safety and safety records and operator safety, and therefore they're getting us engaged and others engaged using digitization initiatives.
Excellent. Absolutely. I think, as Amit, you mentioned, POCs, there's a lot of these concepts and a lot of these industries are still in the POC stage, as we just saw in the polls as well. There's a lot of work that is ahead of us. So we will quickly move into the second. We will actually have two surveys now, and these are both connected. If we can move into the next slide, which is basically ranking. It's not a ranking, basically. You just pick one of the biggest impact of smart technologies, in your view, is consumer, enterprise, production and manufacturing, design and engineering, supply chain, or services, which is the by far what you see is the biggest impact of the, which of these segments have the biggest impact of the smart digitization? So please respond to it in your opinion. Expected. The results are very much expected. Although I would argue some of it is in the consumer space as well.
Quite frankly, I would, certainly there is impact in the consumer space, but some of that is fad-like. It has fad-like nature. If we look at Fitbit, for example, they were very popular a year or two ago, but Fitbit is having a little bit of trouble right now continuing that success.
Absolutely. So we see production manufacturing as 66 and Nexus services. Agree with that as well. Services has a lot of impact on the digitization, and the consumers is the number 3. Can we quickly have the another one also and see, then we can ask the panelists the questions related to both of these surveys. So the next one that we are talking about is in the manufacturing process. What do you see the challenges towards adoption of the smart technology? I mean, we talked about this morning, there was a lot of discussion on the challenges of the technologies, you know, the cybersecurity and other stuff. So what do you see as the challenges towards adoption of the smart technologies? Organizational culture, of course, scientific, sufficient talent, high initial capex, nascent ecosystem, lack of standards, security concerns. I'm interested to see what about security.
Are you trying to taint the results by
No,
suggesting?
no, I'm not.
He's edging it. He's edging it.
No,
He's edging it.
You know, I actually, when we were listening to the keynote speakers this morning, the gentleman from the Department of Homeland Security, he made it sound like it's a huge deal.
It is.
It is a huge
I
deal.
would agree.
So that's why I wanted to see how does the rest of us feel about it. So good. So as we can see, organizational culture is definitely a big thing about bringing changes in any organization and smart manufacturing that we're trying to achieve. That definitely is number 1. Related to that, now let's ask Dr. Satyam, as per your experience, and what do you think are the top challenges in your industry for implementing digital enterprise?
So I think this graph is very, very good.
Very good.
Yeah, because organization culture is, I think, number 1.
It is.
Right? Because if you don't change things, and especially I think my co-panelist just mentioned that use of digitization of oil and gas is very important, right? Because of the unplanned downtime, and it's significant amount of money per minute, so to say. But if you look at it, how things are done, they are very archaic, and they don't know how to do it really well, because the processes are like complex compared to any other industry. But the organizations are actually siloed very much. I think that's true for many of the companies, but for us, they're really, really siloed, because the person who is on the field doesn't really get feedback from the back office until half an hour later, right? Because the data that has to be analyzed is significant. So the challenge is to adopt the smart technology so that you can actually make the decision right on the field. That will actually change the world. So this silo has to break down using the technology. So that's why it's, I think, very, very important. The other one is the lack of adopting new technology. I don't agree with the high initial capex one here, but I don't think using smart technology is necessarily a high capex problem, because the unplanned outages are actually much more expensive. So if you look at the balance, then I think it's adopting technologies is better in this case. But to do that, you have to learn how to transform, right? It's leveraging technology and then transforming the organizational culture, and the process itself is very, very important.
Absolutely, Dr. Satyam, thank you. But I think the initial capex, it's the notion about ROI. Yeah. How much you invest and what is the return on investment, absolutely something that is out there, and people want to spend it wisely. But I want to ask Amit and also Rolf your thoughts about the challenges that the industry faces for implementing. Maybe Rolf, you can go first.
All right, okay. Yeah, I agree with the organization culture, and I'll drill into it with a little bit more specificity. When someone initiates an organization decides to initiate an industrial IoT project, analytics, there is a tendency sometimes to assign it to a junior level person because it involves the internet, and there's an assumption
Sure.
that junior level people understand that better than anybody else. But it isn't really just a technology thing, and under those conditions, it tends to become then an isolated engineering project. In reality, this is much more transformational and involves business processes that go across silos. So where we see it being successful is when it's assigned to an champion, that has a more senior level responsibilities, which involves two things. One is they see the broader picture, the broader business processes, and the second thing is they have the respect of the organization, for lack of a better term, so that if there's some impediment, they can overcome it in a way. Because of this cross-functional nature, you need to be able to influence people in another part of the organization. And just a simple thing, if you're doing predictive maintenance and analytics and IoT, and you have an application that generates an alert, that's a good first step, but you got to do something with the alert. And that's when this cross-functional nature starts to come into play. You need to tell somebody in maintenance, so as an example, about the problem so that they actually do some work to prevent the failure. And it's these broader cross-functional business processes that assure success of the project. And I mean success in the terms of clear business benefits that the C-suite would appreciate and maybe fund the next project.
Very good. I agree with that. I think the cross-functional barrier is pretty big. Who is responsible for it and who's going to do it. It is absolutely true. And also you need to have an assigned champion for this transformation. It needs championship. It needs sometimes the top-down approach. Amit, what do you think?
So just add one, actually two. So one, when we see organizations struggling because they don't have the entire picture. So they do a little bit and they want to see the results and then go on to the next one. And generally, the first project they start off with, or pilot they start off with, is all about data collection or connectivity. Well, it has to be an entire play. It has to be connectivity, data collection, then analysis, as well as a degree of automation. That's when you see the entire benefit. And a number of them stop short of doing the entire thing, and therefore that ROI doesn't match up. So that's number one. Number two is, one thing that Apple taught us, right, at least taught me, I'm an engineer, taught me was it was okay to launch a product without it being perfect. And it's okay to go ahead and send updates even a day after you launch the product and don't apologize about it. Just call it an update, right? Don't call it a fix. That is the key differentiator that we will need to start thinking about when we start adopting digital technology. It's okay for a project to go mainstream, and we will make changes on the fly at times, and I see some people nodding yes and some no, but that is something that's different from general brick and mortar, the way we've been brought up to think about.
Very, very well said. Satyam, you wanted to add something to it?
I have to add on to Amit's comment, right? You can release a product which is not perfect, but you can't do that in oil and gas industry. The risk factors are very, very high.
I would agree.
Right? So for most consumer-facing things, it's okay, but I think when you're talking about lots of people's life in the deep ocean, you can't do such a thing.
Yeah, they can stop.
This is why oil and gas industry takes a long time to test out their equipment before even sending it out.
Fair.
Absolutely. So, they can stop iPhones to be carried on the phones, but
yes,
the planes.
You can build IoT devices fast, test them out quickly, and update them to make it production ready. But that portion should not wait for a perfect IoT device.
Very true. Very true. There's both sides. I mean, as I said, they can stop you carrying the iPhone to the plane, but there are certain things that you cannot have in perfection in the product itself. Thank you. That was very good. So we will move on to our next survey, which is actually focused on adapting. How do we adapt it? Reasons for adapting smart technologies in manufacturing process. it's not from high to low. Just pick one of these. What you think are the reasons for adoption? Is it improved client service, optimization of manufacturing operations, operation agility, improves in the product quality, and or others? Very predictive, actually. Very. Manufacturing operations has seemed to be the largest one here, which is optimization of the manufacturing operations. Yes. Nobody is focused, less people are focused on the client service. Supply chain. Yes. So good. I think that is very expected. Let me quickly write it so we can go to the next one. I am cognizant of the time. Of course, we have only 45 minutes, and I want to make sure that we cover the most of it. And we can also have some questions or interactions, but I want to make sure that we cover the most of it. Obviously, the next survey is on your screen. It is the digitization priorities for the next 5 years. The use of virtual manufacturing techniques, digital integration, adoption of the adaptive analytics for asset management, adoption of the integrated IoT and asset management, and adoption of the integrated supply chain techniques. 7, 14, somebody changing his mind, 17, 37, 36, and 10%.
I have a feeling this is starting to sound like a lottery.
Well, you know, there was a clear mandate on the previous one that adoption of the manufacturing operations is one of the priorities, or is one of the reasons for people to adopt the digitization or digital technologies. And in this one, we can, as you can see, adoption of the predictive analytics for asset management. Ralph, it's right into your alley. And adoption of the integrated IoT are the two, right? Two big ones. So considering that, my question to Dr. Satyam again is, what do you think, according to you, what would be an ideal roadmap for any of the organization for the adoption of the smart technologies?
It's a very simple roadmap, actually.
Okay.
Right?
We want it to be simple.
One is to understand which business areas you can create efficiency. That is probably the hardest part of any businesses that I have actually seen in last 10 years of my consulting plus corporate roles, is to figure out which area do we want to improve, because what we are looking for hidden inefficiency in the process, and we don't know what it is. Because most engineers, scientists believe what they already know. So how do we go there? And so once we figure that out, then finding the technology, because the technology exists, whether it is let me give example from our industry, is like whether it's a pressure sensor or a temperature sensor, or it's a fiber optic cable, a video, what is it that will actually give me insights into it? The technology is available, we can deploy it easily. And then after that, building the predictive engine, which is, especially in oil and gas industries, has to augment the first principles, that's the engineering formulas and simulations. Whereas in other industries, it's much easier. You don't need to go that deep into engineering formulas, there's so much. So one has to really break it down into the business areas, then use the right technology. Don't just go by vendor who just sells you the best shiny equipment or IoT device, but look at what it actually gives you the right metrics that you need, and then build the predictive or prescriptive. Actually, you have to build more prescriptive than predictive analytics on top of it. So that's the roadmap.
Very true. I think having the basic understanding of the organization and understanding where actually it can benefit you is very important. I would ask Amit to add to what you think is the ideal roadmap for this technology's adoption.
Sure. So we've basically seen companies come in and actually map business imperatives first. So that's the key. Once you've done that, then identify some pathfinder lighthouse projects in areas and pick the right ones, if I may. And there's no right answer or wrong answer here. And once you've done that, implement that and find internal champions and then take them to the next level. That's what we've seen as a process that people have followed. I mean, there is a number of them in the US, a number of them in Europe that are successful. And we've seen this over and over in terms of what they've been able to.
But you travel across the globe. I mean, different all the continents you go.
It's for the
Do you
miles.
think? Do you think there is any difference between what we are doing in North America and Europe or Asia Pacific
So-
in adoption?
So
Or
thank
is somebody ahead of us, or is somebody ahead than the other?
See, the scale of the US is much bigger than any other place. I mean, a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, travel more or less as much as I do. The US scale is a lot more, right? But we do see agility in terms of adoption of these technologies higher in the Nordics region at this stage, across, if I may take a stab at that. And that's pretty much what we've seen.
Nordics,
right now.
yeah, absolutely. Ralph, you want to add to it? What you think is the...
Yeah. I'll add a little bit. Both the answers were very excellent from a broad viewpoint. So instead of kind of repeating what they're saying, I'll drill into something very specific.
Yep.
There is a tendency when an OEM is developing a predictive maintenance and to sell add-on services to the installed base, there is a tendency to rush to getting revenue because that's where the prize is. But if you start generating a lot of false positives, that will cause the installed base to lose confidence in what you're doing and essentially maybe even push into an unrecoverable bad image. So the path that I would recommend would be to first go to make sure the infrastructure is working properly. So you would collect the data, put analytics on it, and this is good operating data that the development people have not been able to get a hold of. Most development organizations just have a few machines and a test bed. Now, for the first time, they can get real operating data, put analytics on it, and improve the design of the product. And I would suggest doing that a little bit to, number one, gain a core competitive advantage for your better performing product, but also to work through any bugs with the infrastructure, and then add on and roll out a predictive maintenance solution to your customer base, and with low false positives. And in general, I think the goal is under 5% false positives. And that has to do with humans, what I've read about human psychology, and basically we're a little paranoid. So if someone does something bad, one bad, you need 20 goods, and this is turned out in research, psychology, you need 20 goods before someone will forgive you for the bad.
Yeah.
All right? Certainly that's the way my wife treats me.
Ralph, I also want to ask you about this. Audience said that about 60% of the vote was for optimization of the manufacturing operations as the main reason for adoption of the smart technology. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different opinion? That's for you, Ralph.
For me?
Ralph.
No.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think the more operational side, certainly maintenance and having the equipment up and running reliably is part of operations. It supports operations. So when that particular question was asked, it wasn't a separate question for maintenance. So I would believe that people who were answering for maintenance were including it part of operations. We do see some adoption for operations, and I'll give you one particular example. The packaging industry for consumer products were definitely lagging. And we're now starting to see packaging machines to a large extent do remote monitoring. And with packaging equipment, you have these micro stops where there'll be a temporary blockage and the packaging machine may stop for a second or two or something like that. And that can be a significant portion of the downtime and lower the throughput. And we've seen packaging machine manufacturers be able to monitor equipment through the internet and adjust parameters on the equipment to get that downtime down. And it turns out that they have been able to make repairs to the performance of the equipment without sending a technician to the site 80% of the time. So normally when they would get a call to go fix the piece of equipment, now they're be able to fix those situations 80% of the time through the web.
Very well said, absolutely. You know, I think if you look at the automotive industry, transportation, if you look at Toyota, Toyota had a TPS, Toyota Production System, and just in time for production optimization, they started a long time ago. I think this is about time that we get similar stuff in the process industries, connecting supply chains and how we can optimize overall production. Very good. We can now move on. Did you want to add to this, Dr. Satyam?
No, that's
okay. So I'm keeping the interest of time in mind because we got a lot of good discussions here. We can move our next question, our next survey now. We can go to areas where you are investing in digital technologies. We skipped one, I guess. You guys changed on me. Okay, well, we can get there. So this is basically, we're talking about what industry do you represent? End users, OEMs that sell plants and manufacture, service providers, or media? Oh, there's not much of the media representation here. 3%, not bad. End users, that's where we want to be. End users are basically who are in the midst of this whole technology. Let me ask a question to Rolf about, I did miss one question. I wanted to really ask you this. It was about how the demand for smart technologies have impacted the engineering programs of OEMs. You know, we talked about, we have here OEMs and end users and other things. Didn't want to see, according to you, how did the demand for smart technologies impacted the engineering programs of the OEMs? You know, there are OEMs that are now asked to do more. So what do you think their impact?
Just prior, I gave kind of a quick summary of using the Internet of Things and analytics to gather data, operating data, and improve the design of the product. And then the second part would be around offering predictive maintenance to improve the customer satisfaction and additional revenue. I think those kinds of things are the real best practices for OEMs in achieving very high adoption. In terms of adoption, we've seen it occur in very, very expensive equipment. So I'm taking the value of the equipment as a proxy for how complicated it is, both from a design and maintenance viewpoint, as well as the science that may be inside the machine. So in the semiconductor industry, if there's any semiconductor manufacturers in the room, you'll probably say that you've been doing this for a couple of decades, and that's true. The equipment in the fab costs many millions of dollars. I've seen one up close and personal that was, I think it was $400 million piece of equipment. And it's so complicated and so scientific, it's impossible and totally impractical for a general purpose on-site technician to maintain that equipment. So equipment manufacturers for a couple of decades, used to be called machine to machine, have been monitoring that equipment. And we've seen maybe a couple of years ago, adoption for $1 million pieces of equipment, and Caterpillar and John Deere certainly would be examples of that. We now see rolling out people who sell $100,000 pieces of equipment. And we know from our customer base, people down to $50,000 and $10,000 pieces of equipment are developing those kinds of predictive maintenance, condition monitoring type applications to roll out to their customer base.
Sure. Now, just to connect it to that, Amit, as we see here, can you talk about some of the challenges that these OEMs must be facing in making the products of the smart technologies? Now, we talked about people making devices, people making things, and security concerns, those concerns, and a lot of expectations from different OEMs. What are some of the challenges these OEMs must be facing?
So what we've seen, again, is if you look at products, right? and you look at, you hear about products being open source, people opening up their product source code and all that. So we are seeing OEMs talk a lot more about the user experience than the product itself. And that is starting to make its way back to their design cycles and the way they're designing those products, because they are now focused more
That's
on the
correct.
experience. So that's number one. Number two, there's a lot more awareness about security and connectivity. I mean, there was an article recently in one of the magazines of how somebody hacked into a system by not just hacking into it, but actually leveraging cameras and sensors and all that across industry to be able to ask for DN addresses or whatever, right? So the whole thing about security and how safe and secure is their device and how safe and secure will it be. More importantly, around the liabilities that it carries, because if it's your device that created the breach, then are you responsible for it? So that's number two. Number three is, with all this data that's being collected, who owns the data? So there's conversations about that coming up that is starting to go back to, do I really need to collect this data or do I not? And then I'm liable and responsible for it. So that's the third thing, and that is again addressing, that is starting to impact how people are designing stuff. Finally, it's immediate, it's a cash and carry kind of mechanism rather than, I've been around, in this industry for more than 20 years. We used to have these large SAP implementations, 5-year implementations, multi-million-dollars. People don't seem to have that time for product launch anymore. They want product launch to be launched, and anybody who goes first, the ones who goes second, is in a way getting cannibalized right there. So we are starting to see a number of our clients come to us and say, don't want a huge transformational launch, but can I do incremental widget-based launches that can do incremental gains for me and maybe cover the same speed, cover the same ground, but do it incrementally. So that's the third or fourth thing that we are seeing today in the industry.
Absolutely. I think as we have more and more products which are connected, one of the things that Amit, you mentioned that, one of the things that I was the other day listening to NPR had a huge article about it, was a whole discussion on the cybersecurity. Like, we have our homes now connected on internet, things, the HVACs are connected and the lights and everything. That it could, people are more, the OEMs are right now producing devices, and they're very less worried about the cybersecurity, the security of those devices, and this could be a huge threat. So, yes, I agree with that. Let's move on to our next survey.
I'd like to add.
Oh, hang on, I'm sorry.
I'd like to add a point.
Ralph.
One of the major issues here is
No, we have 12 minutes. Then I started it. It says 12 minutes.
very good.
All right, Ralph, go ahead.
So one of the issues I see is the large variety of technologies needed to do one of these IoT digital transformation projects. And you just think about your cell phone as an example. Instead of the cell phone, a piece of equipment. You've got embedded I/O applications inside there, embedded systems. You need networking up to the cloud. There's cloud infrastructure. You do have Amazon Web Services, Azure, PTC ThingWorks, et cetera, GE Predix, or what other cloud service you provide. So there's analytics involved. So there's a lot of technologies, and each one of those technologies has deep skills that are needed to properly implement it. And one of the things that is problematic for particularly smaller organizations, it doesn't make sense to hire all those skills because, number one, it'd be difficult for you to attract talent that is highly skilled at each one of those technologies. And then when the project's over, what do you do with them all? So it becomes very important to engage with a global service provider who has access to those variety of skills, can bring them in and out of the project as they're needed. I mean, there's a reason why L&T Technology Services is sponsoring this workshop. And part of that reason is because this is a huge business opportunity for them, both in the past and in the future. And particularly in the case of L&T Technology Services, they have significant practice around operating technology, so they understand this space. So that, I think, is an impediment, getting access to the skills, and a global service provider like L&T Technology Services is the means to overcome that impediment.
Thanks, Ralph. Thank you so much. Now, there is another survey question. Obviously, you already answered it. It was not a mandatory. It was a question that you at your discretion, but absolutely, and appreciate your responses. This is to see where we are placed. Is it 10 billion or more, or the size of the organizations? Based on that, I would like to ask a question. You know, obviously, there is one logistical thing that I wanted you to, before you leave the room, we have, if you haven't already put your card into the bucket there, please do so now, because we would like to have a grand prize after this is over. So my friend is coming up with the bucket here. We're going to draw from it. We have a nice present at the end of it. But while he's doing that, I do have a question, another question for the panelists, and it is open to all of you, gentlemen. I do want to hear about what do you think some of the best practices for our clients, for our audience today? What are the best practices in general in the smart industry?
I think the best practice is to actually grow the talent. It's very, very important. It doesn't matter which industry you're talking to, whether oil and gas, manufacturing. We have to train the workforce for the new technologies. And that requires a different kind of thinking, and that has to be actually implemented. Like, you cannot produce these smart engineers overnight, right? There is no way, because they have to learn to see things differently, how these things are connecting. And cybersecurity, of course, as we know, there's a huge shortage of cybersecurity professionals in US. And as a result, like Virginia and some other states are actually implementing big cybersecurity programs. Also, same thing for data scientists, right? The US alone has 250,000 shortage. Don't know where they will come from. So companies have to actually take the people and work with service providers like L&T and other, and gain that knowledge and expand on that, because nobody can have the 5,000 data scientists anymore, right? So only service providers can do that. But there has to be a core team within the organization who can talk the same language. I think that's number one as far as I see, because I see that in our industry, hiring people is a challenge.
Talent, yeah.
Right, and talent is the biggest one, because the technology will evolve. It's actually evolving at much faster pace than anything else, and it's going to evolve. There will be no standardization, especially when it comes to IoT devices. If anybody thinks that we can standardize, that's not going to happen, at least in the next 5-10 years, because standards body has to come together.
Absolutely.
Then they will come up with a plan which will never be implemented by somebody making in a garage an IoT device.
Thank you, Dr. Satyam.
How do we build that, right? So that's very, very important. We have to keep up with the pace.
Ralph.
I'll repeat myself in that it's key to have a senior enough person who can see the business processes that go across silos and manage those business processes assigned to the project.
Absolutely. And one last comment from Amit. Just okay. So good. So we have the pot here. We'll have Ralph take it out. I'll have
I'm going to
him,
have one friend and a lot of enemies.
take the winner of this. All right. Here is John Campbell from Aspen Tech.
All right.